I'm Judith Simpson, Director of the School of Visual Arts and also Chair of the Art Education Program. And I'm most happy to welcome everyone this morning. Met some of you last night, and I've tried to meet most of the rest of you today, but I'd love to talk with you during the conference. And so please seek me out if you care to. This is the first Drawing in the Schools, Practice, Research, and Theory. And I have my colleague Barry Schock to thank for this absolutely wonderful schedule and things being put together, and also my students and also my staff and everyone else who's been behind the scenes working like little worker bees to get ready for today. So we're hoping that today's program, which is packed with information, ideas, and inspiration, will address some of the things that we've been thinking about in art education for ever, I guess we could say. In 1977, I think it was, Jacqueline Goodnow wrote her children's drawing book, and in that book, very near the end, if not the end, she talked about visual thinking, and that drawing was visual thinking. And now we are totally accepting of that term, although I'm sure it shook a few apples off the tree when she actually said it. Why do we teach drawing? Anybody want to hazard a guess? For 1,000 reasons, right? You like my class, and I can't see you, so I can't point. Well, I'm one of these dialogic teachers who asks more questions than she tells facts, and at first my class doesn't respond either. Well, I'm going to tell you why I think we do. I think one of the reasons we must is because it's a human behavior. It's distinctly a human behavior. It's something only humans can do. And we're born doing it, and formal schooling schools it out of us as we go along, because we learn that in our society we value the verbal language much more and the written language than we do the graphic language. And really art is, and drawing is, another language for expressing one's thoughts, one's idiosyncratic expression of who we are as individuals, and also a way that we communicate our personal thoughts in a socially acceptable way that sometimes we can't say it. When do we teach drawing? From day one. And I think if we all did it, then there would be less people running around saying, I can't draw. And we know that takes place too early on in children's lives, that they've decided who the class artist is and that they're not it, and that they don't know how to draw. And if you were fortunate enough to hear Judy speak last night, Judy Burton, I think you could see very clearly through her slides, and I'm sure through Al's too, that all children can draw. And so we should be teaching it from K through 12, whether we, even though we know developmentally that children draw what they think and they know rather than what they see early on, it still is a good time to start. So today we're going to have an exciting, long, but wonderfully productive day. And while we're working, children are working in the other room with Hugh O'Donnell, who's a professor of painting here at BU and who has worked with children in his workshop format of all ages, but today to mix them up is really a wonderful thing. So he's got little people and big people and a lot of art ed people in there working, and at the end of the day we'll share and celebrate what they've done, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about, and that is that all children can draw. Now I'd like to present Barry to those of you who haven't met him. He's an assistant professor in the art education program, and a wonderful friend and colleague, and I'm very happy he's with us. Really thanks.
Good morning. How's everybody? We had a little get-together, a Maryland reunion last night, so I told everybody before they went back to the hotel they had to sleep fast. I'm sure the same had to be true for you, right? Yeah. Well, I want to echo what Judy said. I want to thank our office staff, especially Megan, Julia, Jess, and Melinda. We couldn't have done that last night or today without them. So will you join me in thanking them? It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Al Hurwitz, who is Chair Emeritus of Art Education at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Al taught at the elementary and secondary levels in Miami-Dade County, Florida, before beginning his appointment as art supervisor. He was Director of Visual and Performing Arts for Newton, Massachusetts schools and taught art education at Harvard University Graduate School of Education, Ohio State University, Teachers College Columbia University, Brandeis University, and the Mass College of Art. Al has also written, co-authored, or edited 12 books on art education, served as president of the International Society for Education Through Art, INSEA, the United States Society for Education Through Art, USEA. His national and international awards include the Distinguished Alumnus Award of Penn State University, the Ed Ziegfeld Award, the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Maryland Institute College of Art, the Sir Herbert Reed and Mahood El Bassoumi Awards, and the National Art Educator of the Year Award from the National Art Education Association, NAEA. Al received his doctorate from Penn State University and holds an MFA from Yale Drama School, and you'll probably understand how that flavor comes through very quickly. Dr. Hurwitz served on the Planning Committee of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, the National Certification Program for Art Teachers. He has evaluated programs in art education for the Corcoran School of Art and Teachers College of Columbia University, conducted workshops for the Hirshhorn, the Whitney, and the LA County Museums of Art. And I'm sure this is nothing, you know, his resume has got to be 20 pages. The Hurwitz Study Center for Art Education has been created in his name at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And then I want to tell a tale on Al. Is Helen here this morning? Yes. It's hard. There she is. You see Helen waving? There's the strength behind the face, you see. All these notes that you see him talking from this morning, he said to me, Helen's the only one that can understand my writing, Barry. She has to type for me, you know? Well, the other thing I want you to know about Al is that he sings to Helen every morning when he wakes up. Join me in welcoming Al Hurwitz.
Good morning, class. A word of advice, Barry. Never let the introduction be more interesting than what is going to be said. I feel I should open with a joke, and I can't think of any, but I can think of an interesting thing that happened when I was my first year as an elementary art teacher in Florida. And the fact that this is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, is coming to its end, reminded me that it's possible to laugh at Rosh Hashanah, although it's the New Year. And I remember my principal came to me one day, and she said, Al, why don't you get on the loudspeaker and tell our children about Rose Hosanna? Which I did. And they're still talking about it in Dothan, Alabama. I don't know whether I'm going to read the whole paper, since it's going to be a publication. I will read it selectively, and then you can catch up and fill in between the dots afterwards. And I thought I would begin, for those of you who are from out of state, or even that, or too young to remember, something about the history of what we're doing here in Massachusetts. And if I appear to be squinting, it's because I am. What an appropriate location for a conference on the teaching of drawing. In 1827, students of Boston English High School were taking their first course in drawing. And in 1831, Bronson Alcott opened a temple school in this city. Boston English believed, as did Benjamin Franklin, that the purpose of drawing and education was to prepare students for the world of work. And the temple school, reflecting European romantic philosophy and education begun by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was interested in the relation of art to the imaginative power of children. The, quote, wholly new invisible world, unquote, of which Wilhelm Froebel wrote. The tension then between these two philosophies marked a chapter in the child-centered versus subject-centered debate, which in one form or another is with us today. And later on, I'll tell you how I confronted this on the shores of Woods Hole. That'll give you something to wonder about. 133 years ago, the Drawing Act of this state made drawing mandatory in all towns with a population of over 5,000 or more. My God, that's more than all of Martha's Vineyard by many. And I'm happy to report that Chilmark, the town in which I live, still abides by this law. The Massachusetts Normal Art School was created to prepare teachers to meet the new state requirements for the teaching of drawing, and Mass College of Art, building upon this institution, remains today the only state-supported art school in the country. Walter Smith was invited from England to begin and oversee the implementation of this law, and was the first president of Mass College of Art, as well as Boston's first art supervisor. He wrote the books, he trained the teachers, and as it turned out, he was the first to get fired from both jobs. So thank you, Barry, for setting up this conference in this time and place. It's a very good idea, and I think we should do it like every 2 weeks, if possible. As Barry mentioned, he participated in the Drawing for Schools conference presented by my department at the Maryland Institute College of Art some 20 years ago. And in many respects, that conference was similar to one you are now attending. Judy Burton, through her lecture, Last Night's Dinner, has given us a sense of continuity to this conference. Renee Sendell, the conference evaluator, concluded her remarks by listing over 30 questions suggested by the speakers and discussants. Renee's questions from this conference range from the specifics of instruction, how can secondary portfolios be improved, should children's art drawings be evaluated, to searching for definitions, what is a drawing, what makes a good drawing, to the specifics of classroom instruction that involve a transference or a realization of theory into practice. There were questions involving the use of instructional books, queries of a philosophical nature such as the continuing debate between process and product. And I would like to contribute to this sense of continuity by posing a few questions of my own. In some cases, as you will sense, I already have the answers. I won't read all of the questions, but here are the ones that I think might be of most interest to you. Here's a question that was asked me by an 8th grader. If a student draws, I'm couching this now in art educationese, but I think you can see what was on the boy's mind. If a student draws his version of the decoration of tattoos, war clubs, canoe prows of the Maoris, at what point does this drawing become less of an artistic endeavor and more of an anthropological or social study activity? And does it really matter? And whether it does or it doesn't, how do you think a Maori sculptor would answer this particular question? In a public school situation, do you have to study anatomy in order to master the human figure? I've been asked this many times. I don't think so. Learning to label parts of the body is vastly different from experiencing it. It is impossible to spend time in the presence of a skeleton without giving thought to the person that it belonged to it in an earlier time in life. At some point, speculation probably must begin regarding the nature of death itself, and soon a student's musings begin to resemble an all-night discussion in a Dostoevsky novel with overtones of Woody Allen. Listen to this. In some way, you know, after hours of being in the presence of this subject, you begin thinking about the nature of the universe, the existence of God, the circularity of time and space, and so on. No one has ever gathered any data in what direction our thoughts take us as we draw a skull or even a pile of bones, and I suggest this is an area of research worth looking into. I think I know what goes through an adolescent's mind with his first experience with life drawing, particularly if the model is attractive. When I was a high school teacher, I thought it would make great sense to alternate evidence of death, skeleton, with the best that life can offer, a life model. In my evening classes, I tried to get aging bodies to match the youthful ones. Teaching from the human body can provide, in my opinion, the most intense experience a public school art can offer. In my experience, nothing settles down a class more quickly, makes students feel more professional, provides natural, unforced connections with the histories of art. Working from life and death involves children in deeper levels of introspection and speculation, and it all can be taught without mastering the terminology of bones, muscles, tissues, etc. And I would say that if you're going to learn how to do this, the art program here is as good as any place you will find to acquaint yourself with the workings of your body. Here's a question of ethics. I've been, as president of INSEE, I've been traveling around the world at one time, and so questions would come up that were kind of unique to that situation. On my first trip to China, I visited the Children's Art Palace of Guangzhou. And there I observed an example of one of the worst teaching practices you can imagine. In a class of 5- and 6-year-olds, the teacher gave a step-by-step demonstration of the best way to draw a bunny rabbit. In cases of this sort, it's always got to be a bunny rabbit. It just can't be a rabbit or a hare or anything like that. The children, of course, were delighted with this, and they no doubt felt a sense of power. After all, they were able to depict something that was cute, funny, and which looked like the work of adults. After the lesson, the teacher told me somewhat apologetically that the reason he taught these classes in copying cartoons was because the children liked it so much. Now, is this an adequate justification? Just, you know, because they're happy. This does not represent the way most teachers in China or anywhere else work. I observed Chinese art teachers who used personal experiences, development of their sense of observation, who taught calligraphy and the application of traditional calligraphic brushstrokes to picture making. But then inevitably, you're the visitor from another country, and you're observing something that offends you professionally. And if you comment on it, well, number one, should you comment on it? How should you respond? Will you try to accept it as simply as a cultural difference of one of many that exists between their country and yours? Is it possible to disagree with a teacher without coming across as a Eurocentric critic from a superior Western power? Or should you simply avoid the whole issue and just complimenting them about how happy the kids were, how well the class was behaved? I must admit now, supervisors used to be faced with this problem with new teachers. I mean, it's always a very delicate matter about how you deal with them. And I think nowadays they were a little more abrupt, a little more honest, a little more quick in dealing with it. No, I'll get there. Another question of ethics, relax, this is my last one, involved a colleague from Australia who, upon receiving his invitation to judge a contest in Shanghai, rejected it and made it clear that competition in Australia was frowned upon and he could not accept the invitation. The Chinese, with their usual sensitivity towards saving face, as we call it here, replied, "Come anyway. You can come as an observer and tell us what you think," which is what he did, even though he felt somewhat guilty because he was enjoying it too much. Contests, particularly below the senior high level, are still considered questionable practice in this country. One of the humanistic legacies of the child-centered progressive educational periods, I believe. Despite the NAEA's attitude towards contests, I accepted my invitation, being aware that contests in many societies serve purposes that are just not consistent with our way of thinking. I never thought I would be in a position of defending contests, but when I began traveling around and saw what it meant to children of Eastern Europe as well as Asia, I had to look at it from their point of view. Winning a contest or being accepted into special art programs can be the Asian equivalent of American athletes literally fighting their way out of the ghettos of inner cities at another time. It's still probably. American educators have long recognized the fact that in all contests, whenever you have a winner, you have losers. And what works well on the soccer field may not be appropriate in the art room. The way we feel in general, I think, is anyone who enjoys art, does their best, shows steady improvement, is a winner. And now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we'll go into the slides. You may talk quietly amongst yourselves. As many of you know, it's impossible for me to get through a talk without some kind of visual assistance by the way of slides. Elliot Eisner has never used a slide. And I don't know what he has against him, but as an art educator, he should divide some attention between what the eye sees and what the mind is. But we're both too old to change. So I'm going to start with the dullest slide in the group. And this slide, like all the others, kind of spoke to me from the light board. And they said, "Please take me." And I had a couple of 100 I had unearthed in my basement. And for some reason, these spoke to me more eloquently than others. And some were like old friends by now, and others have, like, I don't think that you've seen this, nor do you have any particular regrets about not having seen this. But it has an interesting story, and I've tried to abide by the rule that do not let the story outweigh the image, and I don't always succeed. But what you're looking at here is the result of investigating the caves of Okinawa after World War II. And I wanted to get as much insight into the lives of the people we've been fighting as possible. I was amazed to learn that some of them brought their families with them, because what I found in the caves were curriculum materials, among them an elementary art guide, so that if you were in Tokyo in 1938, this is what you would have been studying in art. Just two examples. There was pottery, there was sculpture, and a lot of paper applications that required measurement and working to scale and making models of houses and also implements of war and tanks like that. And they had everything but drawing, which is a little surprising because now I think as a country, they have one of the best drawing programs in the world. So let's see what they were doing now. Now, this is a school I visited where you enter through a nursery, and every one of these plants is being raised by one of the students. And their drawing program is based around relating to these plants in various ways, with different focus points, with different materials. And I was lucky to be there on a day when the whole school was called out to the playground, and they sat in circles by grades. So what you were looking at was a human visualization of Lowenfeld stages. You could walk from the first grade to the second grade to and you could see the complexity of the material. They ended up in the sixth grade with mixed media, for instance, and they began with felt black magic markers. And then they added watercolor, and there were different frames of reference for them. Now this is an example from the Meiji period of Japanese history. Now, who would like to identify the Meiji period? What dates are we talking about? See, now I can tell you anything. Well, it really, it really is around 1860. And this is an art school. Excuse me. And he's working with intervals, in the very difficult way with a long brush. Not as long as scene designers use, but we don't use brushes of this size, and I think we should. And then I observed in a first grade class in Japan doing exactly the same thing. Made it a little tougher here because she had to switch colors. And although she was switching colors, she still had to maintain the thickness and the interval. So the idea of discipline and of practice, which might be compared to learning a musical instrument, is in play here. And when Walter Smith was president of Mass College of Art, the kinds of texts he was writing also stressed the discipline of intervals. Not necessarily of circles, I don't remember that, but very definitely of parallel lines and intervals within the lines. Now we're talking really about a subject-centered view of art education, not a child-centered, because I don't think any child is born wanting to have interval exercises. Now, I don't know, you know, this is so complicated, I don't know whether it's upside down or sideways. I think it's it's correct, but it's Picasso Day in the Japanese school. And for the whole day, they do nothing but study Guernica and turn the whole room into a kind of an environment, a Picasso environment, so that you have one thing happening on the floor, and then they grow up to the walls and also to the ceiling. Excuse me. It's the only system I know that has incorporated environments into the art program. Installations, very interesting, and sometimes they're based upon paintings. So imagine, if you will, the School of Athens on this wall, and then continued, as Picasso will be, on all the other surfaces. And they take their in-service very seriously, as we do, except they have much greater use of teacher demonstrations with children, and these same flowers and stuffed birds that you would see here, you would see in an art school too. And notice that the borders of the room are ringed with observers, parents mixed with teachers. So now think back to what they were doing in 1938, and you might ask yourself, what are the distances we have come since I was in high school, because that's when I graduated. Now, a lot of people view art as a language, and this is a very interesting situation of a Brazilian friend of mine who's an anthropologist who heard about the tacunas in the Amazon, and it should be the upper Amazon. Every time anyone refers to the Amazon, it's always the upper Amazon. Mongolia is always outer Mongolia. Anywhere there the tacunas are without any kind of a written language. So her task was to teach them their own language, and she did it through art. These are first-time drawings, all ages, and it's interesting how the so-called developmental stages all merge, and the edges of it are softened when you have a situation where no one has done any drawing. Now this is done by a 14-year-old boy, and it's the beginning of the world. The thing is, they all embody vocabulary, and the amount of words you can get out of this is a big bite into a language, and that's how she taught them. And I remember in Newton we taught the Hmong refugee children the same way. They did drawings and paintings, and they learned English from the vocabulary in that. This is a drawing by that confused Chinese art teacher. Their sources come from, I found, from the Instructor magazine and from a certain category of how to do it book and art guides. And this is another student of the same teacher. Now you see it says 7.5, so it would be in the second grade here. And he got a 95, and it's a drawing I think that would be acceptable on our high school level. And I asked him, how is it you didn't give him 100 or an A? He said, well, nobody's perfect, you know. And this is typical of the source material that comes from publications, not just in China, but in this case from the Mideast. Now, what you're about to see here is an example between drawing and politics. And it's the closest, most dramatic shift that I've ever seen. But at the time of the Cultural Revolution, no, first was the Great Leap Forward, which failed. It was an economic thing. Then was the Cultural Revolution, which is Mao Zedong's big baby, and that was ultimately going to fail. But with the Cultural Revolution, the art, everything was quite contained and disciplined and with kind of depressing similarity. You can't tell whether this is a person or a doll, but they often use dolls as models for people. Now, here's an example. And if you take a look at the part of an illustration next to it, you find they all share a kind of a flatness. And the title of this is, Let Us All Praise the Writings of Lin Pao. Yeah. It would be like going into a first grade class here and say, let us all praise the speeches of Vice President Cheney. And would not be the most exciting visual experience that you could think of. So we're talking about the style of art education that was going on in the Cultural Revolution. Then Deng Xiaoping, who succeeded it, suddenly opened the doors. Now I know that it's still a repressive pseudo-fascistic society with very limited civil freedoms, but it's interesting where it showed the relaxing showed itself. And I was in a classroom when this problem was being presented, done by a 5 or 6 year old, and when he saw the look of amazement on my face, he just picked it up while it was still wet and gave it to me as a gift. and it is now in Penn State, at the Penn State Library. I gave all my international drawings to Penn State. But the fact that it was wet, it was not precise, that forms blended into each other, and it was moving really from the visual child that Lowenfeld writes about to the haptic, the more expressive, seeing a situation from the inside rather than the outside. And it was related to the shifting politics of the country. Basically, there are two kinds of, one way to look at children's drawings. There are two kinds, those that are taught and those that they do without the presence of any kind of a learning situation, simply because they have to do it. And this was done by the, she looked to be 7 years old, the daughter of a souvenir shop operator in central China, and she was bored stiff. And the mother gave her some paper and said, "Here, draw something." The same thing that was said to me when I was in the second grade. "Here, draw something." I just think it's a really interesting drawing, and particularly the image of the sun. There are many variations of that. Someone should do an anthology of children's sun faces sometimes. All right, now I had one project called Memory and Experience, and I was hoping to get enough drawings so that you could compare 3 different cultures: Qatar, where Judy Burton is going in 2 weeks, and Taiwan and Baltimore. I guess it's a culture. Why not? And what I hoped to do was to get a collection, and I did pretty much succeed, in lower, middle, and upper elementary, all taught a la Victor Lowenfeld, taught the same way. No external references at all discussion, sense memory, really beginning the way actors begin. What did you smell? What sounds did you hear? It's also a way of dealing with paintings. As you enter certain paintings, you can ask these sensory-based questions. And that's where this begins. The theme was shopping. And I was surprised while I was looking for the slides to come across a whole cachet of a 4th culture that one of my students who taught at the University of Kuala Lumpur gathered like 200 drawings from Malaysia. So I now have four cultures. So this is upper elementary American, and there's one kind of concern for space here. It comes out of diagrams and rules, doesn't it? And not too much patience with a stock. That's one big cultural difference. An American student will start, and after the 3rd can of Camel soup or beans or whatever, they'll say, "My God, what am I getting into?" So I got to not only continue the shelf, I now have to go to the 2 or 3 shelves underneath that. And to heck with it. And I've never known, I think, one American child to really go through it because of the instant gratification idea. The Asians lack this. This is from Taiwan. And I think they're extraordinarily active, interesting, idea-loaded images, also upper elementary. And quite consistent in. I gave a talk in Taiwan at a conference, and the one who invited me was amazed to see these. And she said, "Where did these come from? These don't look like the usual Taiwanese children." Well, the reason they look so good, very deceptive, is because they're all taught by the same teacher, Professor Chung. I still remember his name, or Chen, who was so good that he was taken out of the classroom and asked to circulate around the prefecture in Taiwan to give workshops to teachers. I think there's enough going on here to hold your attention while I take my second sip of water. I can't talk and I can't see. I mean, it's very... Next year it'll be different. We're now in Qatar, and look what has happened to space. They're just not interested in Western deep space. Everything is pushed up to the picture plane. And in a sense, the cosmetics are against them because they all dress the same way. And all the possible details that you can get out of Western dress, like I look how extraordinary I am with my tie, with my buttons, with my collar, with my coat, with my lapel. In Qatar, I'll just be wearing a white robe. And we're still shopping. And aside from the cosmetics, the things that are happening spatially, and the piling up of images and the lack of overlapping is... and let's see, what age was that? I can't read that from here. What?
Age 8.
Grade 8. All right, so that would be middle. That would be middle. And now we're in Malaysia. And it's not all that different than America, except that it's done with more care, greater attention to detail, better use of memory, and absolutely no problem with piling up the canned goods. There you go. I mean, they may have a little shorthand, it may just be a square rather than the details within the square, but no, one of the projects that I have waiting for me in Chilmark is to show these to some third or fourth graders, and assign the same topic to them, teach it the same way. Then we're going to have a show so they can see how the kids of Chilmark, what they look like next to their peers in Malaysia and Taiwan and in Baltimore. This is one of the best skeleton drawings I received in the advanced placement portfolio. Incidentally, plastic doesn't do it. If you're going to, and if you can't get a skeleton, get a skull. And if you can't get a skull, get some cow bones. In South Africa, many art teachers have a thing worked out with the Department of the Interior so that you can imagine the treasure trove of decaying animals and bones that are in the Serengeti and in the Shishlui areas. And so every art room that I visited always had a pile of incredible bones, some of them vertebrates, hips from elephants, you can imagine. This is the most unusual art, one of the most unusual art teachers I've ever seen. She's a dancer and an actress, as well as an art teacher, and she works as you see, in the nude or in life, whatever you want to call it. And she teaches as she dances, and she keeps her eye on the drawings of the children around her on the floor. And so she's doing three things at one time, and I try to tell the student teachers, please don't try this unless unless you check with your local rabbi or minister or principal or whatever. Now, as you can see, this does not look like your conventional classroom. And she is really on the faculty of the Royal College of Art, and they have a program of outreach where they send out faculty members to rural parts of England, like the Isle of Wight or whatever, and I think that's where this was taken. Oh, now these are a group of girls in South Africa who have just received a box of bones from the Department of Interior, and on the wall behind them you're seeing some giant studies of peppers, which in many respects resemble the parts of bones. Now, I've always been interested in, it's not easy to catch a teacher in the act of teaching. And when I was in the Institute, I knew the teachers, and thank God I was welcome, and they knew that I liked to drop in and watch good teaching. And part of it is in setting, are the setups. And this is where a certain kind of imagination, teaching imagination, shows up. What do you do to the room that embodies the problems that you're dealing with at that moment, that will capture the imagination of the students. And so these are just a collection of setups that I shot around the Institute and elsewhere. Is that clear or not?
Focus is a little off.
Okay, there you are. And I think in this particular problem, you could start anywhere and see where it would lead you, above and below and right and left. And just doll parts hanging from the ceiling. And eggs on a rumple. I love these because I never would have thought of myself. Every one was showed the kind of teaching imagination that a professional might have who spent a whole lifetime thinking about these things. And this is one that I set up in Miami around a Seminole family, bringing in all the props of Seminole living. And this is a class I taught around the Institute when we were, the problem was to deal with space without getting into any of the laws of perspective, because I found that there's a disjuncture between the diagrammatic and the rule-laden method of teaching perspective and getting out there and really doing something in real space. Same thing with color. You can do the color wheel, but that doesn't mean that I cannot envision any artist doing a painting with a chart in his left hand and a brush in his right. So what we did here was to see if we could establish foreground, middle ground, and background. And this is a perfect example of the type that Lowenfeld was talking about, the visually minded child who gives you a lot of information about what you see. And this is from, I think, Croatia or Czechoslovakia. Same approach, same attitude or approach. And this is in Theresienstadt. I visited there because I was doing research on a Holocaust art teacher. And here are two views looking at the same street. And this I would class as a haptic. And a haptic to me is someone who makes among other things, makes very conscious choices of the use of materials in order to get at the emotional heart or response to a subject. As in, I think this is a rubbing. And this is also from one of the children of Theresienstadt, what the train looked like. Even though he was on the inside, he imagined what it looked like from the outside. But there's a third approach that I don't think Lowenfeld mentions at all, and that's I call them the symbolists, and they deal with things that stand for things, and so if you have to interpret the meaning of the safety pin, mending a broken heart, and it's different than seeing a picture of someone being punished in a public square. And it's right next to metaphor. Oh, and this is also symbolic treatment of choice, of what lies ahead. You have many roads, which one shall you take, and what lies at the end of each road. And this is from my Hungarian collection. This is my favorite because this is a special needs kid, and he's considered retarded. And it comes from the story of Noah. I have a special collection just on the story of Noah. And I tell them the story and ask them to pretend they're illustrators. They can choose one scene. What will you do? And I've never seen anything like this. You have the God figure that is getting ready to punish all of us to the right, and then you have all of us lined up here, each with our own private storm that we've earned because of our attitude towards God, and the storm at the top getting ready to descend to bring the flood. Now, I could be wrong there. Many times it's just a symbolic strip of blue that appears in the second and third grade. Or sometimes they start to fill the whole area, but they can't deal with bringing the background blue up to the foreground subjects. Like if he wanted to continue that, he would have to leave enough space so that you could see all of the raindrops that are falling. And sometimes you can give the impression of being a haptic or a very expressive kind of artist by the materials that you use. Who knows what this material is? What? Tempered? No. It's from Israel, which means nothing, because I think an American child would do the same. That's not pastel. A manufacturer in Israel was launching a new business in colored plasticine and gave it away by the ton. Now, he expected, and we all expected, that they would model with it like clay. But some of them discovered that if you put down pieces and spread it with your thumb, it would be a form of painting. And since you could never get into any detail and never do anything realistic, I don't think, that you came across as someone who's more interested in emotion. And I think the subject, of someone who is shouting is probably came after the drawing rather than before. And they're also in Theresienstadt. And most of the drawings that Friedel Dicker did, her name was Friedel Dicker Brandeis. She's in the first graduating class of the Bauhaus, and a fantastic figure as an artist and as a teacher. And all of the elementary experiences were based upon memory and experience. The secondary ones drew from her experience at the Bauhaus in the basic design course. So I thought it was interesting. Children at a time of extraordinary crisis with really no hope in sight were suddenly asked to do exercises. And when you think about it, it's a totally neutral zone of activity, isn't it? That's totally devoid of any kind of emotional involvement. And they also did a lot of studies of paintings, and Friedel was, in her correspondence, was always asking for books on art history. And so they went through very laborious formal analysis of, it was totally, totally, you would not, this is the last thing in the world you would expect. It was totally removed from personal experience. And in the 60s, drawing took all kinds of unusual turns. It was a time of drawing games. And this is team drawing. I remember you put down one line, but you can't put down anything unless you consider its relation to what has preceded you. And then this is a drama major who is combining movement with drawing, and this is also done at the Bauhaus. So it wasn't something just born of the 60s. But in other words, there's a whole realm of drawing that is tied to the purely imaginative, spiritual, and to mood, and to anything but depiction. The greatest storytellers are the Zulu kids, and they're all journeys. Everyone that I'm sure they do other things, but the ones that I saw were journeys. And on the journey, various things happened to them. Oh, I'll have to backtrack. Another journey. And you find this a lot in Gothic painting too. I mean, the travels of Moses and who he encounters. Oh, this is the first prize winner at the Shanghai drawing contest that I was judging. It's extraordinary drawing, 14-year-old boy, and it's extraordinary because the closer you get, the more complex it gets. And it's at that time they were redoing Shanghai on the other side of the Peace River, And no, it's a Peace Hotel. I forget the name of the river. But this was his vision of what Shanghai could look like. Drawings about this big. I tried to buy it from him. I wouldn't sell it. This is an extraordinary thing, too. This is by a 5-year-old boy. And as an elementary teacher, I would have been very happy to have had just one section of that at that age for one of my students. And it just erupted, just poured out of me, couldn't stop. That's, you don't have to set up criteria for giftedness when you see someone like this in action. That was not part of the exhibition, though. That was in the school. And this is an example of what I call the Malaysian blockbuster. The kids in Asia know that not only do they have to win a contest, but they really have to mow down the judges. And the way you do this is with a lot of people, a lot of shapes, a lot of forms, and with a horizon line that is high. It's like Bruegel's games. The higher the horizon line, the more you can show between the horizon line and the viewer. And that's how they win their prizes. That's how they get accepted into the children's art palaces, they call them, or the special schools, which meet on Sunday morning and Saturday morning. And very few people know this, but I've been there like 4 times, and once out of the 4 times I saw some adult Chinese taking notes, and I asked the teacher who they were, and they were representatives of factories, and they were scouting for talent. And these are the kids who make the incredibly complex, detail-ridden things that you would find in the souvenir shops, like large sculptures of boats made out of ivory. When I was in the second, I was late coming to school because I was sick. And when I turned up in the first grade, it was the first grade, the teachers, I said, gave me a piece of paper and said, here, draw something, keep yourself busy. I would so love to say that this is my drawing, but it's a Japanese drawing. And when you see something like, and you see so many of these, you really start getting very curious about racial or national differences or tendencies, and what would happen, what's happened to this child when he comes over here and goes to an American school. Do we kill it, or? I've never really explored that the way I should. I'm closing this, I close the circle here. My first year as an elementary teacher, I think this is before Lowenfeld, you were going by instinct and what you picked up at a county meetings, and there was school arts, that was about it. And so I got the idea, I was very interested in motivation, I got the idea that if you took kids outdoors and let them get nice and sweaty from playing circle games, that would be a good motivation for picture making, because there was a kind of, in the physicality, there was kind of an authenticity about it. So after the games, they went back and I had all of the supplies laid out for them, just like in that Japanese school I showed you. It starts on the playground, gets finished inside. And the only reason I'm showing you this now is because I did the same thing about 3 weeks ago. And I did it in Showmark School. And honest to God, I can't tell any difference. You may be relieved to know that the children have not changed all that much, because this is about at least 50 years old. Oh, there was a great vogue for we're out at 11th. Okay, very quick. I'll skip over these. But there was a vogue for paintings of children working at art in the late 19th century in France. The 2 leaders were Bonvin and Frère. I'm going to close with this. I'm going to start with an unusual statement. You see the boy. He is the darling of the intellectuals of Champfleury and Théophile Gautier. All of them. They're all lined up on the right side of the picture. That's the positive side of light. And you see the little boy drawing there. And you see so many of them drawing because the child is now the prototype of the artist. Fresh, honest, naive, open, free of guile, free of the strictures of the adult world. And so he's really the romantic child, which was the beginning of the child-centered programs and progressive education. And, I apologize for not having the rest of the picture. The dark side is here, the positive side is there. And this child was killed not in Falmouth, in Woods Hole. Now, how do I get that? How do I get that? That he died at Woods Hole. Bear with me on this. Talk about effect. Sputnik went up around 60, in the 60s, I guess. And the Russians were ahead of us. We panicked. We got to change education. The big conference was held at Woods Hole to decide what shall be done about science education, later all education, even art, and art came in toward the end. And from this came a lot of money from the U.S. Office for the U.S. Office of Education. Kennedy was the big force behind this. And from that money came the Penn State Conference. At that conference, Manny Barkin saw that aestheticians, philosophers, historians, is beginning to sound familiar with it, were sitting next to art teachers and artists. And therein lies the most significant root of discipline-based art education. And it's all been content-based approach to art rather than child-centered based. And so that is how this child died in Woods Hole. Thank you.
Al, thank you. You can imagine we provide some kind of honorarium to people who do this, but Al told me last night for the small fee of $20 he would give you transfusions at 3:30 if you would like. So, Al, I told them, you told me last night for $20 you'd give them a transfusion after the conference today, right?
Art teachers, $18. No senior citizen discounts.
Al, we're really in awe of your spirit, your goodwill, and your intellect, so thanks for taking the time to come over and share your ideas with us today. Well, with that, I'll send you to your first breakout.